Hi, this is Margie with FlowMotion Education, and in this video I'm going to be talking about spinal mechanics. If you have worked with me in the past, you know that I encourage all my clients and students to really visualize their moving skeleton and even forget they have muscles at all. It sounds a little crazy, but it makes more sense once you actually start practicing that way. So I'm going to just give you a little idea of what we want to do when we're thinking about spinal mechanics. So with any of our joints in the body, and in the spine, we have all these bones called vertebrae. You probably know that. But they're actually, between two vertebrae is considered a joint. It's actually a joint because there's movement. It's bones that meet, and there's movement between them, which is kind of the definition of a joint. So with any joints in the body, but including the spine, ideally what we want is movement at all levels so that the load is distributed and you don't get excessive movement at any one particular level. And I have this little image that illustrates that. So here is a spine that is stuck and it can't move between the vertebrae here and it can't move between the vertebrae here. And let's say we're forward bending the spine. So if I try to forward bend the spine and I'm stuck here and I'm stuck here, I'm going to move at the first place where there's motion available. This poor juncture is taking a big hit. What we want ideally is distribution of the movement or sharing the load throughout the spine. So an important concept when we're doing anything with the spine or you're visualizing your spine moving, if you take classes from me, we're almost always going to move the spine to keep it prepared for movement. An important concept is what we call spinal articulation, and in particular sequencing through the vertebrae, because it wouldn't make sense to move up here and then move down here. So we really want sequential use of the spine. And what this snake represents, you should see the looks I get when I have new clients walk in the door and I got these little snakes all over the studio. What this snake represents is that between any two vertebrae in your spine, there's not a lot of movement. There's a little more than that, but there's not a lot. But the movement of all of the combined movement creates a spine that actually has a lot of motion. So we want to maintain the ability to articulate or move at all levels of the spine. And I got news for you, we live in a three-dimensional world, so your spine can move forward and back, and it can move side to side, and we want the same thing. We want the load sharing. We want articulation at every level in the spine, and it can rotate. Same thing. We want to be able to rotate at every level throughout the spine. And in the real world, most movement is triplanar. So for example, I'm changing a light bulb. I'm going to go into a back bend, a rotation, and maybe a little side bend to change that light bulb. So we really want to keep our spine prepared to move at all levels in all three planes. So in a lot of my exercises, the focus is the spine. And so when we're working spinal mobility, this is a gross oversimplification, but for now it'll do the trick. When we're working spinal mobility, that focus is articulation at every level and in every plane. When we're working spinal stability, so I want to pick up a really heavy object, for example, we're going to imagine, this is the image, so when you're doing your exercises, you can really picture this. From your tailbone to the top of your head is one bone. There is no intervertebral motion. So I actually want you to poke yourself in the tailbone. Okay, that's the bottom of my spine, this pointy bit. And this is the top. Okay, it's really your skull, but we're going to consider it for now the top of your spine. And for exercises where we're really focused on spinal stability, it's a really important juncture to be able to visualize is your hip joints. And most people can't. I've been teaching for a long time now, over 20 years, And I often will start a class by saying, do you know where your hip joints are? And most people will point here or here. And I got news for you that they are pointing to the pelvis. If you point here, that's your pelvis. Although in layperson's terms, we call this the hip bone, but it's not your hip joint. It's your pelvis. That's where you're pointing, to your pelvis. And the other one, you're pointing to your femur, kind of, so you're a little close, maybe a little closer to the hip joint, but it's still not the actual joint. So the joint itself is where the movement occurs. And for spinal stability, it's a really important juncture to be able to visualize. So for purposes of spinal stability, we're going to be doing movements where, again, from here to here, there is no motion. It's one bone. There's no intervertebral motion. And so you're going to have to really have a good sense, this is all going to move as one piece, that I'm moving from my hip joint. So for example, when I want to go pick up a heavy object, I'm hinging at the hips, I'm one bone, I'm not going to pick up a heavy object with intervertebral motion. I'm going to use my hip joints, and of course my knees, but you need to be able to picture this juncture. So that is going to be our focus whenever we're doing spinal work.